The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the cold darkness between stars like a metal moon made by hands instead of nature. Its silver walls stretched for miles in every direction, and thousands of lights blinked along its surface, like tiny stars. Inside the station's biggest room sat beings from across the galaxy, and their voices filled the air with sounds no human ear had ever heard before today. Lieutenant Colonel Park Hana walked through the long hallway that led to the council chamber. Her black boots made soft sounds on the metal floor as she moved toward the huge doors ahead. The uniform she wore was dark blue with silver buttons and carried the symbol of Earth's United Defense Force on her shoulder. She had trained for this moment for months, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to see. The doors opened with a hiss and revealed a room so large that Earth's biggest stadium would fit inside it 3 times over. Thousands of seats rose up in circles around a central platform where holographic displays showed images and data that changed every few seconds. The air smelled strange and carried the mixed sense of different worlds and different forms of life. Park Hana found her seat in a section marked for observers. The chair was too big for her human frame, and she felt small among the alien representatives who filled the other seats. Most of them paid no attention to her arrival. A few glanced her way with what might have been curiosity, or might have been something else entirely. At the center platform stood Commander Vextar of the Scaled Empire. His skin looked like green metal scales that caught the light when he moved, and his yellow eyes had pupils that were thin black lines. When he spoke, his voice sounded like gravel being poured into a metal bucket, and his forked tongue flicked out between his words. "Today we examine the request from the species called humans," Vextar announced to the assembly. "They wish to join our Galactic Defense Coalition and believe their military forces can contribute to our strength." A sound like thousands of insects buzzing filled the chamber as the representatives of the Hive Collective stirred in their seats. Their leader, War Master Clickth, stood on 4 thin legs, and his compound eyes reflected the light in hundreds of tiny rainbow fragments. When he spoke, his voice sounded like clicking and scraping, but the translation devices turned his words into something Park Hana could understand. "The humans have provided us with extensive records of their military capabilities," Clickth said, while his mandibles moved in what might have been a smile. "Perhaps we should review these fascinating displays of primitive warfare." The holographic display changed to show scenes from human history. Tanks rolled across muddy battlefields while soldiers ran beside them carrying rifles. Planes dropped bombs on targets below while other planes tried to shoot them down. Ships fired cannons at each other across blue ocean water while smoke rose from their decks. "Observe their primary weapons," Vextar said, with something that sounded like amusement in his gravelly voice. "Metal projectiles propelled by chemical explosions. Their largest naval vessels would barely qualify as escort ships by our standards. Their aircraft move slower than our personal transport pods." More images appeared showing human soldiers in different conflicts throughout the centuries. Men in trenches throwing grenades at each other. Troops moving through jungles while carrying heavy packs and weapons. Urban combat where fighters moved from building to building while explosions lit up the night sky. A representative from the Crystal Federation rose from his seat. His body looked like it was made from living diamond, and when he spoke, his voice rang like bells. "General Yoon Minho wishes to address the council," he announced. The crystalline being that was General Yoon Minho stepped forward, and his transparent form caught the light from every direction. "My people have studied these human conflicts with great interest," he said in his musical voice. "They appear to spend most of their military effort fighting members of their own species rather than external threats." Laughter filled the chamber, but it was not the kind of laughter that humans would recognize. Instead, it was a mixture of sounds that included chittering from the insect-like beings, low rumbling from creatures with thick hides, and high-pitched whistling from the energy-based life forms. Some aliens made no sound at all, but their body language suggested they found the topic amusing. "How remarkable," said a representative from the Aquatic Dominion, whose voice bubbled like water flowing over rocks. "A species that has not yet learned to unite against common enemies. They fight each other with such enthusiasm that they have developed hundreds of different ways to kill their own kind." War Master Clickth activated a new set of images that showed human weapons in detail, rifles that fired bullets, cannons that shot explosive shells, and missiles that carried warheads to distant targets. Notice the crude nature of their technology. They still rely on kinetic impact and chemical reactions rather than energy manipulation or matter displacement. Their largest weapons can barely damage the hull plating of a modern scout ship, added Commander Vextar. Yet they seem proud of these devices that would have been considered outdated by our ancestors thousands of years ago. Parkhana sat quietly in her observer seat and watched the display continue. Her face showed no emotion, but her hands gripped the armrests of her chair tight enough that her knuckles turned white. She had expected this reaction from the Galactic Council, but experiencing it in person felt different than preparing for it in training simulations. The presentation continued with more examples of human military tactics. Infantry formations moving across open ground while under fire, cavalry charges from earlier centuries when humans still rode animals into battle, naval battles where wooden ships fired cannons at each other until one side surrendered or sank. The most primitive aspect of human warfare, announced a representative from the mechanical synthesis, whose voice sounded like computer circuits processing data, is their continued reliance on biological soldiers. They send living beings into combat zones where they can be easily damaged or destroyed. Our automated defense systems can deploy millions of mechanical units without risking a single life, agreed General Yoon Minho. Yet humans continue to put their own people in danger when simple robotics could accomplish the same objectives with greater efficiency. More alien laughter filled the chamber, and Parkhana noticed that even some of the more diplomatic species were having trouble maintaining serious expressions. Representatives from peaceful civilizations who rarely engaged in warfare seemed particularly amused by the human military records. A being from the ethereal consortium floated above its seat, like a cloud of glowing gas, and spoke in a voice that sounded like wind through leaves. Perhaps the humans could serve as historical consultants, it suggested. Their extensive experience with primitive combat techniques might be useful for educational purposes. Yes, agreed Vextar, while his scaled face twisted into what was definitely a smile. They could demonstrate ancient warfare tactics for our military academies. Students would find it educational to see how their ancestors might have fought before they developed proper technology. The chamber erupted in another wave of alien amusement, and Parkhana felt her jaw clench despite her training in diplomatic restraint. She had been warned that the galactic community might look down on human military capabilities, but the reality of their condescension was harder to bear than she had expected. Their application for coalition membership includes impressive statistics about their recent conflicts, Click continued while new data appeared in the holographic display. Apparently, they consider it noteworthy that they can move supplies across planetary distances in mere days rather than hours. And they take pride in communication systems that require several seconds to relay messages across continental distances, added the representative from the neural network whose thoughts seemed to flow directly into the translation system without the need for spoken words. Parkhana opened the tablet device she carried and began taking notes about each species and their reactions to the presentation. She recorded which civilizations seemed most dismissive and which ones showed at least some curiosity about human capabilities. This information would be valuable for her report back to Earth Command, even if the Council rejected humanity's application to join their alliance. The presentation concluded with a summary of human military statistics that drew final comments from the assembled representatives. Their weapons had limited range compared to galactic standards. Their ships moved slowly and carried small crews. Their communications were primitive, and their logistics required enormous resources to maintain. In conclusion, Commander Vextar announced to the chamber, while we appreciate the humans' enthusiasm for joining our coalition, their current military capabilities would contribute little to our defensive efforts. Perhaps in a few centuries, when they have developed more sophisticated technology, we might reconsider their application. The session ended with the representatives filing out of the chamber while continuing their conversations about the amusing primitive humans and their quaint weapons. Parkhana remained in her seat until the room was nearly empty before finally standing and walking toward the exit. The second day brought new sounds to the council chamber as representatives arrived for the emergency session. Parkhana walked through the same hallways, but this time she noticed the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. alien. Voices carried notes of concern that had not been present the day before, and their movements seemed more urgent than the relaxed pace of yesterday's gathering. The holographic displays at the center of the chamber showed star maps with red zones, marking areas where something terrible had happened. Dark symbols indicated destroyed worlds and missing fleets, while yellow warnings marked regions where communication had been lost. The sight made Park Hana's chest tighten as she realized the scale of whatever threat the Council was facing. Admiral Jorik of the Crystal Federation stood at the main podium, and his transparent form seemed to flicker with internal light as he prepared to address the assembly. His voice rang through the chamber like music played on crystal bells, but the melody carried sadness that needed no translation to understand. "Fellow council members," Admiral Jorik began, while the star map behind him zoomed in on the outer rim, territories. "We face a threat unlike anything our civilizations have encountered in recorded history. The entity we have designated as the Shadow Fleet has destroyed 17 colonies in the past month alone." The display changed to show images of dead worlds where cities once stood. Empty buildings reached toward gray skies while no lights shone in any windows. Streets that should have been filled with activity lay silent and covered with dust that no wind disturbed. The scenes looked like photographs of abandoned places, but Park Hana knew they showed worlds where millions of beings had lived just weeks before. "Our investigation teams have found no survivors on any of the affected worlds," Admiral Jorik continued while new images appeared, showing the aftermath of whatever had happened to these places. "No bodies either. The populations have simply vanished along with any trace of what happened to them." War Master Click rose from his position among the Hive Collective representatives, and his compound eyes reflected the red warning lights from the displays. "Our sensor networks detected massive energy discharges in each system before contact was lost," he reported in his clicking voice. "The signatures do not match any known weapon types in our databases." A new set of images showed the Shadow Fleet itself, and Park Hana leaned forward in her observer's seat to get a better look at humanity's potential enemy. The ships appeared as dark silhouettes against the stars with hull designs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their shapes were angular and sharp like blades designed for cutting rather than the smooth curves that most galactic civilizations preferred for their vessels. Intelligence analysis suggests the Shadow Fleet consists of approximately 300 vessels of varying sizes, reported General Yun Minho, while technical specifications appeared alongside the ship images. Their largest units appear to be roughly equivalent to our Dreadnought class, but their construction methods and materials remain unknown. Commander Vexistar activated his throat display and showed tactical analyses of previous engagements between coalition forces and the mysterious enemy. "Our standard battle formations have proven ineffective against their attack patterns," he admitted with obvious reluctance. "They seem to anticipate our movements and counter our strategies before we can implement them." The tactical displays showed space battles that looked like elaborate dances between formations of ships. Coalition vessels moved in precise geometric patterns, while firing energy beams at long range toward enemy formations that seemed to flow like liquid around the incoming fire. The Shadow Fleet ships moved in ways that made no sense according to standard military doctrine, but somehow always ended up in positions where they could strike at coalition weak points. "Their targeting systems demonstrate accuracy that exceeds our best predictions," Admiral Jorik continued while battle damage reports scrolled past on secondary displays. "They consistently hit critical systems with their first salvo, while our return fire seems to have minimal effect on their hull plating." Park Hana studied the engagement records and noticed patterns that the galactic military leaders seemed to have missed. The Shadow Fleet always attacked in the same general manner, but with subtle variations that made their tactics difficult to predict. They used deception and misdirection in ways that reminded her of human military history, but carried out with technology that far exceeded anything Earth could produce. Captain Thule of the Aquatic Dominion rose to address the Council, and his blue-green skin rippled with patterns that indicated deep concern. "Our psychic warfare specialists have attempted to establish communication with the Shadow Fleet, but their minds appear to be shielded by technology we do not understand," he reported while data streams showed failed contact attempts. "All diplomatic overtures have been ignored." added the representative from the peaceful consortium, whose floating form pulsed with colors that indicated frustration. They respond to our messages with increased aggression rather than any attempt at negotiation. The session continued with reports from military commanders who had faced the Shadow Fleet in direct combat. Their accounts painted a picture of an enemy that fought unlike anything the galactic community had encountered before. The Shadow Fleet used tactics that seemed to break every rule of civilized warfare, while somehow remaining devastatingly effective against superior coalition forces. They target civilian populations without warning, reported War Chief Zeklon of the warrior clans, while his scarred face showed the kind of anger that came from watching helpless innocents suffer. Our evacuation protocols assume enemies will provide some opportunity for non-combatants to escape, but the Shadow Fleet attacks without any preliminary demands or ultimatums. Fleet Admiral Corvus of the Void Hunters stood to present his analysis of Shadow Fleet movement patterns. His species had evolved from pack hunters, and their understanding of predator behavior made them excellent tactical analysts. They hunt like apex predators, he explained while tracking charts showed enemy fleet movements across multiple star systems. They isolate targets, cut off escape routes, and strike when their prey is most vulnerable. But predators can be understood and countered, objected General Yoon Minho, whose crystalline form brightened with determination. We simply need to develop new technologies that exceed their capabilities and deploy them in sufficient numbers to overwhelm their defenses. Our shipyards are already working at maximum capacity, Admiral Jorik replied, while production figures appeared on the displays. We have tripled our construction rates and redesigned our most powerful weapons based on data from previous engagements. The new Dreadnought-class vessels should be ready for deployment within 6 months. War Master Click buzzed with agitation as he spoke about the Hive Collective's response to the threat. Our automated defense networks have been upgraded with new tactical algorithms, and our drone swarms now operate with improved coordination protocols, he reported while technical specifications scrolled past too quickly for Park Hana to read completely. The discussion continued for hours as representatives from dozens of civilizations shared their plans for defeating the Shadow Fleet. Every proposal followed the same basic pattern that had guided galactic warfare for thousands of years. Bigger ships with more powerful weapons operating in larger fleets with better coordination and superior technology. Park Hana listened to each presentation while taking notes on her tablet device. She recorded not just what the alien military leaders said, but also what they did not say and what assumptions they made without questioning. The pattern became clearer with each speaker as she realized that none of them seemed to consider alternatives to their traditional approach to warfare. During a break in the formal session, several alien officers approached Park Hana with what appeared to be friendly curiosity about human perspectives on the situation. Captain Thule led the group, and his aquatic features showed expressions that seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. "Your species has extensive experience with conflict," Captain Thule said, while his skin patterns shifted to colors that indicated respectful inquiry. "We understand that humans have been fighting wars for most of your recorded history. Perhaps you have insights that might help us understand this new enemy?" Park Hana chose her words carefully as she responded to their questions. "Human military doctrine emphasizes adaptation and flexibility," she said, while trying to sound helpful rather than critical. "We have learned that enemies often change their tactics when traditional approaches prove ineffective. But surely, technology must eventually triumph over primitive tactics," insisted a representative from the mechanical synthesis whose electronic voice carried certainty that brooked no disagreement. "Superior firepower and advanced targeting systems should overcome any tactical innovations the Shadow Fleet might employ." "The Shadow Fleet does possess superior technology," agreed General Yoon Minho, whose crystalline form reflected the chamber, lights in complex patterns. "But our combined industrial capacity far exceeds theirs, and we can eventually produce enough ships to overwhelm them through sheer numbers." The third day brought chaos to Nexus Prime as emergency signals filled the communication channels and urgent messages arrived from across the galaxy. Park Hana arrived at the council chamber to find alien representatives gathering in small groups, while their voices carried the sharp notes of fear and disbelief. The normal formal procedures had been abandoned as speakers called for immediate action rather than following diplomatic protocols. High Counselor Mordan of the Ethereal Consortium, floated at the center of the chamber like a storm cloud made of silver light, while energy patterns flickered across his translucent form. His voice when he spoke sounded like wind through ancient trees, but carried an authority that made every being in the chamber fall silent to listen. "Fellow beings," High Counselor Mordan announced while the massive displays showed updated star maps with new red zones marking recent disasters. "The situation has deteriorated beyond our worst projections. 3 coalition battle fleets have been completely destroyed in the past 18 hours. The chamber erupted in sounds of distress, as representatives from dozens of species responded with their own forms of shock and dismay. Chittering, roaring, electronic screeching, and psychic emanations created a symphony of galactic panic that needed no translation to understand. Admiral Jorek stepped forward while his crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated deep sorrow. "The Fifth Fleet under Admiral Kesara was obliterated while attempting to defend the Helix system," he reported while images appeared showing the aftermath of the battle. "No survivors. No escape pods. The entire formation of 43 vessels simply vanished from our sensor networks." War Master Clickth rose on his thin legs, while his compound eyes reflected the red warning lights that now dominated the chamber. Displays. "The Hive Collective's 7th Swarm met the same fate near the Triangulum Relay Station," he added, while his mandibles clicked with agitation. "Over 200 automated vessels lost contact simultaneously." The worst news came from Fleet Admiral Koravas, whose scarred face showed the kind of pain that came from losing friends and comrades in battle. "The pride of our combined fleets, the dreadnought Infinite Logic, has been confirmed destroyed along with its entire escort group," he announced while technical specifications for the massive ship appeared on the displays. Park Hana studied the data about the lost dreadnought and felt her stomach tighten as she realized the scale of the disaster. The Infinite Logic had been the most advanced warship in the galaxy, with weapons that could crack planets and shields that should have been impenetrable. If the Shadow Fleet could destroy such a vessel, then no coalition ship would be safe from their attacks. "Casualty reports are still being compiled," Admiral Jorek continued while numbers scrolled past on secondary displays. "Current estimates indicate 47,000 coalition personnel lost in these 3 engagements. The Shadow Fleet suffered no confirmed losses." The chamber fell into a silence that seemed to press down on everyone present, like the weight of all those deaths hanging in the air. Park Hana had read about battles in human history where thousands died in a single day, but seeing the galactic community struggle with similar losses reminded her that death was universal, even among beings who had mastered the secrets of space and time. Commander Vextar activated his throat speakers and addressed the assembly with a voice that carried more emotion than Park Hana had heard from him before. "Our standard engagement protocols have proven completely ineffective," he admitted, while tactical analyses showed how each battle had unfolded. "The Shadow Fleet anticipates our movements and counters our strategies with precision that suggests they understand our methods better than we do ourselves. They target our command vessels first," reported Captain Thule, while his aquatic features showed patterns of confusion and frustration. "They somehow identify our flagships and key communications relays despite our electronic countermeasures and stealth technologies." General Yoon Minho's crystalline form brightened as he presented new data about Shadow Fleet capabilities. "Analysis of debris fields suggests they are using weapons based on principles we do not understand," he explained while images showed twisted metal that had once been coalition ship hulls. "The damage patterns indicate directed energy weapons, but with effects that exceed our theoretical maximums." The discussion continued as military leaders shared increasingly desperate reports about failed engagements and ineffective countermeasures. Every attempt to adapt coalition tactics had been met with Shadow Fleet responses that suggested the enemy could predict galactic military thinking with impossible accuracy. War Chief Zeklon stood to address the council while his battle-scarred face showed the kind of determination that came from refusing to accept defeat. "Perhaps we need to consider more aggressive strategies," he suggested, while displaying plans for massive fleet concentrations. "If we gather our remaining forces into a single overwhelming armada, we might be able to match their firepower through sheer numbers." Our logistics networks cannot support such large concentrations, objected the representative from the Supply Guild, whose multiple arms gestured at charts showing resource allocation across Coalition space. The fuel and ammunition requirements would exhaust our reserves within weeks. High Counselor Mordan pulsed with colors that indicated deep thought as he considered the various proposals being presented. We must face the possibility that conventional military solutions may prove insufficient, he said, while his ancient voice carried weight that made every being in the chamber listen carefully. Are you suggesting surrender? Demanded War Master Click, while his compound eyes glittered with what might have been outrage. The Hive Collective has never yielded to external threats, and we will not begin now regardless of the odds against us. Not surrender, High Counselor Mordan replied, while his ethereal form shifted to show patterns that indicated careful consideration. But perhaps evacuation of the inner systems until we can develop more effective responses to this threat. The chamber erupted in protests as representatives from the core worlds rejected any suggestion of abandoning their home systems. Voices rose in anger and determination, while species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia refused to consider retreat from an enemy they barely understood. Fleet Admiral Corvus raised his voice above the din, and his words cut through the chaos, like a blade through silk. Our conventional approaches have failed, he announced, while his hunter's eyes surveyed the assembled beings. We need new strategies and new ways of thinking about this enemy. What do you propose? Asked Admiral Jorik, while his crystalline form flickered with curiosity about any solution that might save their civilizations from destruction. I propose we consider that everything we know about warfare may be wrong, Fleet Admiral Corvus replied, while his scarred face showed the kind of honesty that came from accepting hard truths. The Shadow Fleet fights unlike anything we have encountered, and our responses follow patterns they seem to anticipate. Ambassador Tekmar of the Neural Network rose from his position among the psychic species, and his thoughts flowed directly into the translation system without need for spoken words. Perhaps we should consider seeking advice from species with different perspectives on conflict, he suggested, while his mental patterns carried undertones of desperate hope. What species could possibly help us? Demanded Commander Vextar, while his scaled face twisted with skepticism. We represent the most advanced military minds in the galaxy. Ambassador Tekmar's mental emanations carried what might have been bitter amusement as he responded. Perhaps we should ask the humans for advice, he suggested, while his thoughts projected images of the previous day's presentation about primitive human warfare. They have certainly had enough practice killing each other. The chamber erupted in alien laughter that mixed chittering with roaring and electronic screeching as representatives remembered the amusing display of human military capabilities they had witnessed just 2 days before. Even beings who normally maintained diplomatic composure could not suppress their amusement at the suggestion that a primitive species might help advanced galactic civilizations solve their greatest military challenge. Commander Vextar wiped moisture from his reptilian eyes while his laughter subsided into chuckling sounds. Yes, let us ask the species that still fights with metal tubes and chemical explosives how to defeat an advanced stellar armada, he said, while his voice carried mocking tones that made several other representatives resume their laughter. War Master. Click buzzed with amusement while his mandibles clicked in rhythm with his alien humor. Perhaps they could throw rocks at the Shadow Fleet or charge them with their primitive aircraft, he suggested while his compound eyes glittered with what passed for mirth among his species. Their largest weapons could barely damage our shuttlecraft, added General Yoon Minho, while his crystalline form brightened with patterns that indicated he found the entire concept hilarious. What could beings who fight with chemical projectiles possibly teach us about energy weapon tactics? The laughter continued to ripple through the chamber as more representatives joined in the mockery of human military capabilities. Park Hana stepped into the center of the massive chamber, while her boots echoed against the metal floor in the sudden silence that had fallen over the assembled representatives. Every alien eye, sensor array, and optical organ focused on her small human form as she stood beneath the towering displays that showed the devastation the Shadow Fleet had brought to their galaxy. You mock our primitive warfare, she began, while her voice carried clearly to every corner of the chamber, despite the vast space around her. "You laugh at our projectile weapons and our chemical explosives and our barbaric surface battles. But you are missing something crucial about what you call primitive." She activated her tablet device and projected a holographic display that showed scenes from human history spanning thousands of years. Ancient warriors with bronze swords faced enemies with iron weapons. Medieval knights charged against crossbow bolts and gunpowder cannons. Infantry with rifles advanced against machine gun positions while aircraft dropped bombs from above. "You call us primitive because we have been fighting each other for millennia," Park Hana continued, while the images changed to show the evolution of human warfare across the centuries. "But what you see as a weakness, I see as experience. We did not stop at the first sign of effective tactics. We kept evolving and adapting and improving." The display showed how human military technology had developed through constant conflict and innovation. Stone weapons gave way to metal ones. Muscle power was replaced by mechanical force. Simple tools became complex machines as each generation of warriors learned from the failures and successes of those who came before them. "Every conflict taught us something new," she explained, while tactical diagrams appeared, showing how human armies had adapted to face superior enemies throughout history. "When our enemies built stronger walls, we did not just build bigger catapults. We developed siege tactics and tunneling operations and psychological warfare." Captain Thule shifted in his seat, while his aquatic features showed patterns that indicated growing interest. "But surely technological superiority must eventually triumph over tactical innovation," he said, while his voice carried the uncertainty of someone whose assumptions were being challenged. "Tell that to the Persian Empire," Park Hana replied, while the display showed the Battle of Marathon, where outnumbered Greek forces defeated a much larger Persian army through superior tactics and terrain usage. "Tell that to the Mongols who conquered civilizations with better weapons and stronger fortifications by using mobility and psychological warfare." More examples appeared showing how smaller forces had defeated larger ones throughout human history. Vietnamese fighters using tunnels and guerrilla tactics against technologically superior armies. Afghan tribes defeating modern military forces through knowledge of local terrain and unconventional fighting methods. Urban resistance movements that turned entire cities into weapons against occupying forces. War Master Klikth buzzed with agitation as his compound eyes studied the tactical displays. "These examples involve conflicts between similar species using comparable technology levels," he objected while his mandibles clicked with nervous energy. "The Shadow Fleet possesses capabilities that exceed our understanding." "Exactly, Park," Hana said while her eyes flashed with something that might have been satisfaction. "They are using tactics you do not understand because you have never had to think beyond your technological superiority. You have grown complacent." She manipulated the holographic controls to show recent engagements between coalition forces and the Shadow Fleet. The tactical patterns became clear when viewed alongside human historical examples of asymmetric warfare and unconventional military thinking. "For 1,000 years, galactic warfare has been the same," she continued, while pointing to the repetitive nature of coalition battle plans. "Big ships with big guns operating in big fleets, using predictable formations and standard engagement protocols. Your enemies have always fought the same way because they learned their tactics from you." General Yoon Minho's crystalline form brightened as he began to understand the implications of her analysis. "You suggest that our military doctrine has become too standardized," he said, while his musical voice carried notes of recognition. "I suggest that you have forgotten what warfare actually is," Park Hana replied, while new tactical displays showed the fundamental differences between galactic and human approaches to combat. "You treat military engagement like a technological demonstration or a formal duel between gentlemen. But war is not about having the best weapons." She activated a new series of images that showed Shadow Fleet attack patterns overlaid with coalition defensive responses. The enemy movements followed principles that human military strategists would recognize immediately, but seemed to confuse galactic commanders who expected battles to follow established rules. "Look at these engagements," she said, while highlighting specific tactical elements that revealed Shadow Fleet strategy. "They are using deception and misdirection and psychological warfare. They are making you fight on their terms while you keep trying to outgun them with superior firepower. Fleet Admiral Corvus leaned forward, while his hunter's instincts recognized patterns in the Shadow Fleet behavior that he had sensed but never fully understood. "They hunt like predators," he said, while his scarred face showed growing comprehension. "They isolate targets and strike at weakness rather than meeting strength with strength. And they understand something you have forgotten," Park Hana continued, while her voice carried the authority of someone who had studied conflict for her entire professional life. "Warfare is not just about technology. It is about will and adaptation, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to win." The chamber filled with alien murmurs as representatives began to grasp the implications of her words. Species that had ruled space for centuries were being told that their approach to military conflict was fundamentally flawed by a being from a world they considered primitive. Commander Vextar raised his scaled head while his yellow eyes fixed on Park Hana with something that might have been respect mixed with skepticism. "What do you propose we do differently?" he asked, while his forked tongue flicked with nervous energy. "I propose you stop thinking like galactic powers and start thinking like warriors," she replied, while activating new tactical displays that showed alternative approaches to fighting the Shadow Fleet. "They expect you to meet them with massive fleets in open space. So do not do that. Make them come to you." The displays showed how terrain could be used as a weapon in space warfare, just as it had been used on planetary surfaces throughout human history. Asteroid fields that would disrupt, formation flying, planetary gravity wells that could trap enemy vessels, nebulae that would interfere with sensors and communications. "Force them into environments where their advantages diminish," Park Hana continued, while showing how human forces had used environmental factors to defeat superior enemies. "Make them fight in places where superior technology matters less than tactical flexibility and adaptability." War Chief Zeklon studied the proposed battle plans, while his warrior's mind began to see possibilities that traditional galactic military thinking had never considered. "You suggest we abandon our strengths to fight in conditions that favor neither side," he said, while his battle-scarred face showed growing interest. "I suggest you force them to fight on terms they do not expect," Park Hana corrected, while highlighting specific tactical innovations that could disrupt Shadow Fleet operations. "Every engagement you have fought has followed patterns they can predict. Give them something they have never seen before." High Counselor Mordan pulsed with colors that indicated deep thought as his ancient mind processed concepts that challenged millennia of military tradition. "You are asking us to abandon everything we know about civilized warfare," he said, while his ethereal voice carried undertones of uncertainty. "I am asking you to remember what war actually is," Park Hana replied, while her human eyes met the gaze of beings from across the galaxy. "It is not a civilized activity. It is not a technological competition. It is about making your enemy unable or unwilling to continue fighting." She activated final displays that showed how the Shadow Fleet's apparent invincibility could be turned against them through proper application of human military principles. "They understand this," she said, while pointing to enemy tactics that followed classic principles of warfare. "You have forgotten it through centuries of prosperity and technological superiority." Admiral Jorik's crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated growing comprehension. "You suggest that our advanced capabilities have made us predictable," he said, while his bell-like voice carried notes of revelation. "Your enemies have always fought like you because they learned from you," Park Hana explained, while showing how galactic military doctrine had spread throughout space. "The Shadow Fleet fights differently because they learned from someone else. Someone who understands that winning is more important than fighting with honor." The chamber fell into contemplative silence as alien minds processed ideas that challenged their fundamental assumptions about military conflict. Representatives who had mocked human warfare hours before now struggled to understand concepts that their civilizations had never needed to develop. The chamber remained silent for what felt like hours, while the assembled representatives processed everything Park Hana had presented to them. Alien minds that had ruled the galaxy for millennia struggled to understand concepts that challenged their most basic assumptions about warfare and civilization. The holographic displays continued to show tactical analyses and historical examples, while no one spoke or moved. High Counselor Mordan was the first to break the silence as his ethereal form pulsed with colors that indicated deep contemplation mixed with growing comprehension. "Lieutenant Colonel Park Hana," he said while his ancient voice carried new respect that had not been present in previous sessions. "Your analysis presents possibilities we had not considered. It also presents dangers we may not be prepared to face," added Admiral Jorik, while his crystalline form flickered with patterns that showed internal conflict between hope and fear. "The strategies you describe would require fundamental changes to how our civilizations approach military conflict." War Master Click rose on his thin legs while his compound eyes reflected the chamber lights in thousands of tiny fragments. "These tactics demand acceptance of casualties and destruction that our peoples have not experienced for centuries," he said while his mandibles clicked with nervous energy. "The political implications could destabilize our entire social structure." Park. Hana nodded while her human face showed understanding of their concerns. "Change is never easy," she replied while her voice carried the patience of someone who had expected this resistance. "But the alternative is extinction. The Shadow Fleet will not stop because your people find warfare distasteful." Commander Vextar activated his throat speakers, while his scaled face showed emotions that were difficult for humans to read, but seemed to indicate grudging acceptance. "Assuming we were willing to consider these unconventional approaches," he said while his forked tongue flicked uncertainly, "how would we implement such radical changes to our military doctrine?" "You start by accepting that everything you know about fighting might be wrong," Park Hana answered, while activating new displays that showed training scenarios and organizational structures. "Then you begin learning from species who have never had the luxury of fighting clean wars." She showed examples of how human military forces trained for unconventional warfare, including survival techniques, guerrilla tactics, and psychological operations. "Your officers have learned to command from protected positions using advanced technology and superior firepower," she explained, while tactical diagrams illustrated the differences between galactic and human command structures. "Human commanders learn to lead from the front because survival often depends on personal example and immediate decision-making," she continued, while showing how human military leaders operated in chaotic environments where communication could be disrupted and technology could fail fleet. Admiral Corvus studied the human command examples while his hunter's instincts recognized elements that resonated with his own species' pack-hunting traditions. "These approaches require commanders who can adapt quickly to changing circumstances," he observed while his scarred face showed growing interest. "They require commanders who understand that the enemy gets a vote in how battles unfold," Park Hana replied while showing examples of human military planning that included multiple contingencies and flexible responses. "Your battle plans assume the enemy will behave predictably. Human plans assume the enemy will do everything possible to disrupt your expectations." General Yun Minho's crystalline form brightened as he began to understand the implications of adaptive military thinking. "Our strategic algorithms are designed to optimize performance based on known variables," he said, while his musical voice carried notes of recognition. "But if the enemy introduces unknown variables, then our optimization becomes meaningless." "Worse than meaningless," Park Hana corrected, while showing how rigid planning could become a vulnerability when facing adaptive enemies. "Predictable behavior gives your opponents advantages they can exploit. The Shadow Fleet has been using your predictability against you since their first attack." Captain Thule shifted his aquatic form while patterns on his skin showed colors, associated with reluctant understanding. "Implementing these changes would require retraining our entire military establishment," he said, while his voice carried the weight of someone who grasped the magnitude of what was being proposed. "The alternative is losing the war," Park Hana replied with blunt honesty that made several representatives uncomfortable. "You can maintain your current approaches and continue losing fleets until the Shadow Fleet reaches your home worlds. Or you can adapt and give yourselves a chance to survive." War Chief Zekalon stood while his battle-scarred face showed the kind of determination that came from accepting hard truths. "The warrior clans have always valued courage over comfort," he announced while his voice carried across the chamber. We will embrace these new methods if they offer hope of victory. Victory may not be possible, Park Hana cautioned, while her expression showed the serious nature of their situation. But survival might be if you are willing to pay the price for it. Ambassador Tekmar of the neural network projected thoughts that carried undertones of desperate hope mixed with uncertainty. What would be the first steps in implementing these changes? He asked, while his mental patterns indicated willingness to consider options that had seemed impossible hours before. Park Hana activated new displays that showed organizational charts and training programs adapted for galactic military structures. You need officers who can think like the enemy instead of like themselves, she explained while showing how human intelligence services studied opponent psychology and decision-making patterns. Your current intelligence analysis focuses on technological capabilities and resource allocation, she continued while comparing galactic and human approaches to understanding enemies. Human intelligence seeks to understand how opponents think and what motivates their actions. The presentation continued with detailed explanations of unconventional warfare principles that could be adapted for space combat. Park Hana showed how terrain could be used tactically in three-dimensional environments, how deception operations could confuse enemy sensors, and how psychological warfare could disrupt opponent decision-making processes. The most important change, she concluded while her eyes met the gaze of beings from across the galaxy, is accepting that winning is more important than fighting honorably. The Shadow Fleet understands this. You must learn it too, High Counselor. Morden pulsed with colors that indicated he had reached a decision that carried enormous implications. The Ethereal Consortium supports implementing these new approaches, he announced, while his ancient voice carried authority that resonated throughout the chamber. One by one, other representatives began voicing their support for trying human military methods despite their reservations about abandoning traditional galactic warfare doctrine. The vote was not unanimous, but the majority recognized that continuing their current approaches would lead inevitably to defeat. Fleet Admiral Corvus stood to address the assembly while his hunter's eyes showed the kind of focus that came from committing to a course of action. The Void Hunters nominate Lieutenant Colonel Park Hana to serve as Special Strategic Advisor for Unconventional Warfare, he announced, while his scarred face showed respect that would have been unthinkable days before. Seconded, declared War Chief Zeklon, while his warrior's instincts recognized someone who understood the realities of life and death conflict. Agreed, added General Yoon Minho, while his crystalline form brightened with patterns that indicated acceptance of new possibilities. The formal vote proceeded quickly, as representatives who had mocked human warfare hours before, now formally, requested that a human officer help them learn how to fight for survival. Park Hana accepted the position while understanding that she was about to attempt something that had never been tried before in galactic history. There is one more thing you need to understand, she said while the chamber prepared to adjourn. These methods will only work if you commit to them completely. Half measures against an enemy like the Shadow Fleet will result in complete destruction. Commander Vexitar nodded, while his scaled features showed acceptance of harsh realities. We understand that our survival depends on embracing approaches our ancestors might have recognized, but that we have forgotten during our centuries of technological dominance. The session concluded with representatives filing out of the chamber, while their conversations revealed fundamental shifts in thinking that would have seemed impossible when the meetings began. Species that had ruled space for millennia were preparing to learn warfare from beings they had considered primitive, savages. As the chamber emptied, Park Hana remained at the center platform while composing her report to Earth Command. "Control, this is Park Hana," she began, while her words traveled across space toward her home world. "The galaxy is about to learn why humans are so effective at warfare. It is not because we are warriors by nature," she continued, while her message carried the weight of species pride mixed with grim determination. "It is because we have never had the luxury of not learning from our mistakes.